On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, Day 153, CIA director reportedly visited Egypt and Qatar in order to try to develop the hostage deal, as more news is emerging about disagreement within the Hamas leadership regarding the terms of a truce. In the rundown to Ramadan, Hamas reportedly hoping to unite Palestinian uprisings in Israel and the West Bank, while Israel is trying to control the situation. The IDF continues its operations in Hamid city of Han Yunis. Commando units reported arresting many Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives. In his State of the Union, U.S. President Biden says that the United States will develop a naval port to allow humanitarian aid to flow into the Gaza Strip from the sea. Barrages of rockets fired by Hezbollah as Islamic Resistance in Iraq militia claim a drone attack against IDF outposts in the northern parts of Israel. IDF retaliations reported throughout southern Lebanon. Hello everyone, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here I bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of March 7th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of March 8th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, negotiators are continuing to work around the clock in order to try to come to some sort of breakthrough between the sides, so far to no avail. The CIA director William Barnes visited Egypt yesterday and had reportedly traveled from there to Qatar as the sides started to coordinate how they're going to apply pressure on both parties, Israel and Hamas. The U.S. ambassador to Israel stated that talks have not collapsed and are constantly ongoing, however, also said that no breakthrough has been achieved. Amidst this, the Wall Street Journal reported today about internal disagreements within the Hamas leadership with regards to the deal, stating that while Ismail Haniyeh, who is the official leader of Hamas but in practice the external leader, initially agreed to the proposed framework of the negotiators and was willing to accept a 6-week truce in order to use that time in order to come to a broader agreement, Yahya Sinwar, who is the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, toughened conditions and made larger demands, including agreeing to a complete ceasefire and IDF withdrawal from Gaza already in the initial stage of the deal. This disagreement between the leaderships was later denied by sources in Israel, who stated that both sides of Hamas leadership are interested in escalations. Amidst this, the Hamas delegation reportedly left Cairo today, ending this stage of the negotiations. The Egyptian Al-Akhbariya reported, however, that the delegations may return in the coming days in order to try to restart negotiations, possibly in order to reach some framework maybe within the first week of Ramadan, if not before Ramadan. The Washington Post reported today that the United States is also considering pressuring Qatar to expel the Hamas leadership from the country if a deal is not reached. I will add that this is very unlikely that it will actually come to the fold because while both Israel and the United States view Hamas as their enemy, they actually have a lot of interest in the Hamas leadership staying in Qatar because this allows for these negotiations. If, for example, the United States were to compel Qatar to expel Hamas from Qatar and Hamas were to move to Iran or to Syria, they would then reside in a country that does not have open relations with the United States and would then very much complicate these ongoing negotiations. So while this is a threat, it is very unlikely that it will actually come to the fold. Meanwhile, in Israel, Minister Eisenkot, who is part of Benny Gantz's party and is an observer in the war cabinet, stated today that returning the hostages is unequivocally the top priority of the war, and without returning the hostages, there will be no victory. It's important to note this was stated in response to statements of other ministers from the last several weeks, among them the Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich and different Likud members, who stated that it is not the top priority to return the hostages, but rather defeating Hamas is the top priority, and that through defeating Hamas, the hostages will return. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there were barrages of rockets sent from the Gaza Strip targeting southern parts of Israel today. These targeted primarily the areas of Sderot. There were also rockets sent towards the areas of Ivim, Nir Am, and Nachal Oz. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, there were ongoing bombings reported in the Jabalia refugee camp. However, there were no specific reports if there's any fighting going on the ground in Jabalia, as well as what these bombings were actually targeting. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, in the central camps, a Hamas unit was reportedly identified loading weapons onto a truck. The IDF warplanes attacked this unit, and many secondary explosions were seen in the region, seemingly confirming there were a lot of weaponry being loaded onto these trucks. The bulk of the fighting remains in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in Han Yunis. The IDF is continuing its operation in Hamid city, with substantial raids reported alongside more clandestine operations that the IDF is carrying out. Now, it's important to understand that this neighborhood has many building blocks and towers, and reportedly, IDF units have been raiding them on foot and carrying out more arrests than usual, and a lot of these operations have been done by commando units more clandestinely. Earlier in the day, it was reported that the IDF also took over several Hamas command centers in the region, destroying several tunnel entrances as well. In addition, IDF airstrikes were noted in the Al-Qarara area. This is in the areas north of Hamid City, as the IDF is continuing its operation in this region and possibly will invade Al-Qarara after Hamid City. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. There were reports today that the United States is considering forbidding Israel from using U.S. weaponry when Israel carries out the Rafah operation. While this is speculative, Prime Minister Netanyahu seemed to respond to it already today while visiting an IDF officer school, stating, and I quote, "The IDF will continue to operate throughout the Gaza Strip, and that includes Rafah. Whoever tells us not to operate in Rafah and to lose the war should know it's not going to happen." So again, while this was just a speculative report the United States may do that, Netanyahu is already seemingly answering that and saying the IDF is going to operate in Rafah no matter what anyone else says. Other news, there are growing reports about Hamas's civil defense committees. These are groups of Palestinians in the area of Rafah that have been sent in order to, quote, maintain order and monitor prices in Rafah markets amidst the collapse of the police force in the area. So in the last several weeks, the police in Rafah have completely collapsed after several IDF targeted assassinations of the chiefs of police, as well as different police units. Reportedly, police officers stopped showing up to duty. This is one of the things that was a big contributor to the breakdown of the entrance of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. After this, at the beginning of February, there were already reports that these civil defense committees, these are Hamas operatives, but are actually people who are not officially employed by Hamas, simply units that are going out, some of them armed, some of them walking around with clubs and makeshift weaponry, that they are trying to enforce law and order on the streets on the one hand, on the other hand, control prices of the black market. Officially, Hamas has said that they're sending out these units in order to try to enforce law and order. Unofficially, it is very likely that Hamas is trying to show that even after the police force breaks down, Hamas is still the governing body in the area, since the bulk of the Palestinian population is situated in the Rafah area, and if Hamas loses control of sort of civil obedience and the civil administration, then their government will have effectively collapsed, and that's why they're sending out these people who are reportedly trying to enforce some measure of law and order. Other Palestinians are also reporting that they are also carrying out their own black market racketeering along the way. It remains to be seen how this develops. Other news, Al-Ahbar, which is a Lebanese Hezbollah affiliate, reported that Israel has been negotiating with Egypt about how to coordinate the situation during Ramadan if a truce and hostage deal is not reached. According to the report, and quotes were brought in from several diplomatic sources that backed up these statements, during Ramadan, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians may be evacuated from Rafah to refugee camps that Egypt has been constructing along the Gaza coast, and Israel is going to divert trucks that have piled up in Rafah through the Kerem Shalom crossing in order to redistribute aid in these camps, and that this will be part of a several-week operation that is going to be coordinated between Israel and Egypt to evacuate Palestinian civilians from the Rafah area, leading up to an Israeli invasion of Rafah, which may occur during or after the month of Ramadan. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers are reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began at 247. There was a report that 18 IDF soldiers were injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. However, the official numbers have not been updated, and thus the official number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is 1,469. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 83 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 30,800. 72,298 Palestinians reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. I remind everyone that according to the IDF figures, some 13,000 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and some 12,000 have been injured, so possibly this is the number in relation to the amount of Palestinians that have been killed. However, both agencies, the IDF and the Palestinian Health Ministry of the Gaza Strip, do report these different figures. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, there were different reports coming out today about a possible maritime aid route that is going to be developed into Gaza. After it was reported yesterday that the IDF has been developing a plan with regional actors to develop this maritime aid route, today it was reported that Netanyahu's military attaché, General Avi Gil, visited the United Arab Emirates in secret in the last several days in order to advance this plan that reportedly would involve the United Arab Emirates funding the aid that would then be loaded in Cyprus, inspected by the IDF, then make its way to be distributed in the Gaza Strip. Later in the day, however, it was reported the United States is going to establish a seaport in northern parts of the Gaza Strip in order to coordinate the entrance of humanitarian aid through this nautical corridor. The New York Times reported that the port is going to be developed in cooperation with regional countries, and that it is unclear if Israel is going to take part in this effort. According to other reports, the operation is expected to take place in the coming few weeks and will not involve U.S. troops on the ground, but rather they will stay on ships in the area. So it's important to note that while this was announced in President Biden's State of the Union later in the day, it was publicized earlier in the day, and reportedly Israel was caught by surprise by these publications. In Israel, it was stated that while the U.S. delegation did visit the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in order to find a suitable area to develop the port, in Israel, they had not expected that this plan would be developed so fast. At this stage, it's unclear if there is coordination between Israel and the United States, if these are two different plans, or if they are the same plan that's simply being reported along a different timetable. In Biden's State of the Union, he did say that the maritime port is going to be developed in coordination with Israel, but it's currently unclear if these plans are actually coordinated or if these are two different plans and maybe we're going to run side by side in order to do what the United States has asked of Israel and quote-unquote flood the Gaza Strip with aid. In other news, while the humanitarian situation in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip has been severely deteriorated in the last several weeks due to a range of factors, some of which I will say I'm going to publish a short video in the coming days that will talk about these factors that contributed to this disaster, a UN report was released yesterday stating that throughout the month of February, the amount of aid missions coordinated between humanitarian aid agencies and the IDF throughout the entire Gaza Strip increased by almost 50% in comparison to the situation in January. So again, it's important to note what that report is saying, that coordination between the IDF and humanitarian aid agencies regarding how much aid is allowed into the Gaza Strip and coordinating if and where it can be distributed increased substantially throughout the month of February. That does not mean that aid is flowing freely into the Gaza Strip or coming to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. It's just by comparison to the situation in January. At the same time, the situation in the north continues to worsen. While yesterday I stated that different reports cited between 18 and 20 people have died as a result of malnutrition and dehydration in the north, those numbers have now been confirmed on 20, including children and babies who are more susceptible to this famine that is causing people to die from malnutrition and dehydration. Other news, the IDF reported that 237 aid trucks carrying food, water, medical equipment, and shelters passed through into the Gaza Strip throughout the day. The IDF coordinator of activities in Palestinian territory stated that in addition to these, there are 250 trucks on the Gazan side of the Kerem Shalom crossing that have already passed through Israeli inspections and are awaiting aid agencies to coordinate their pickup and distribution. Moving on to the West Bank, there was substantial IDF activity reported in several different areas throughout the West Bank. An unusual announcement was made about an arrest that was carried out in the heart of Nablus today, reportedly of a Palestinian involved in terror activity. However, there was no statements made regarding who he is, what terror units he belonged to, or why this happened in the middle of the day, so we may find out more about that in the coming days. Other IDF activity was reported in the area of Al-Khadr, that is in Bethlehem, Orif in Nablus, and several other different areas in Jenin and Kilkilia. A total of 20 Palestinians were reported arrested in the West Bank in the last 24 hours. Other news, the IDF opened up one of the blocking checkpoints that is established, known as the Jath checkpoint, at the entrance to Nablus in the last 24 hours. This checkpoint was established at the beginning of the war, since October 7th. In response to its current removal, several settler groups arrived on site and blocked the area themselves, and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who is the head of the Religious Zionism Party, tweeted that he sent a letter to Netanyahu demanding the addition of more blockades and checkpoints to be leveled against Palestinians, adding that the IDF's decision to remove this checkpoint at this time is, quote, insane and reckless. Other news, the Wall Street Journal reported today that since October 7th, 5 unauthorized settlement outposts and 15 different roads for settlers have been established in the West Bank. The report added that some of these roads were established within a few days with Israeli government funding, noting specifically the settlement outpost near the Farha village that is near the settlement of Ariel. So it's important to note, when I say unauthorized settlements, there is a difference in Israel in terms of the legality between settlements that the State of Israel approves, such as yesterday I said that some 3,400 housing units have been approved by Israel to be developed in settlements. So according to Israel, that is legal, while by international law it's illegal. Unauthorized settlements are settlements that are initiated by settler groups on the ground that, even according to Israel standards, are considered illegal and are considered land grabs of Palestinian territory. However, over the years, Israel has largely turned a blind eye to these different settlements. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, there were substantial barrages of rockets sent from Lebanon targeting the northern parts of Israel today, again an escalation. After yesterday there was some de-escalation, today more escalations. Over 30 rockets were sent towards the areas of Rosh Nikra, Ya'ara, and the Upper Galilee. In addition to this, other barrages targeted the areas of Kibbutz Dan, Dafna, Sha'ar Yeshuv. There were also anti-tank missiles launched from Lebanon towards the areas of Metula, where there was directed in a house. Other anti-tank missiles also launched towards areas of Hardov and Hermon. In addition to this, a Hezbollah suicide drone was intercepted by the IDF in the Bar'am region. Another drone reportedly crashed in the areas of the Hermon. Hezbollah claimed 7 border incidents in addition to all these throughout the day. Regarding IDF activity, IDF warplanes reportedly attacked Hezbollah military structures in several different parts of southern Lebanon. These include the areas of Zabkin, Itaron, and Ita Sha'ab. In addition to this, Lebanese sources reported IDF attacks in the Wadi al-Azia region. As the IDF retaliated with artillery fire against launching sites, Al-Miyad and Al-Manar also reported attacks in the areas of Anakora, Yarun, and Ita Sha'ab. Other news, Al-Ahbar reported today that Israel has set a March 15th deadline to reach a diplomatic resolution between Israel and Lebanon before launching escalations and possible full-on invasion of the country. This report was denied by Israel, however it may actually be part of the pressure mechanisms that each side is trying to level against the U.S. Special Envoy to the region, Amos Hochstein, who is trying to negotiate a diplomatic resolution between the sides. It is possible that Israel set that deadline and is denying it publicly, or in turn, it is possible that Al-Ahbar is trying to lay the foundation for its own escalations in the coming days as another pressure mechanism from Lebanon. Moving on to some of the regional developments, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which is an umbrella organization of several different pro-Iranian militias, claimed responsibility for a drone attack against an IDF outpost in the areas of Rosh Pina. This is the northern parts of Israel. There are no reports made in Israel about this attack. It's unclear if it actually took place, if so, if it caused any damage. However, that claim was made by the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. In Yemen, amidst the growing escalations in the Red Sea, Holland announced today that it is going to send a destroyer to the region to join the maritime forces that the EU has already sent there. Other news, Al Jazeera today quoted a senior Hamas official in the Al-Qassam brigades, stating that Hamas is operating in coordination with other quote-unquote resistance forces in Lebanon, Iraq, and in Yemen, adding that the Houthis have escalated their attacks recently in light of Israel's intentions to invade Rafah. The source also added that Hamas is going to play a role in negotiating the release of the crew of the Galaxy Leader, that is the crew that was kidnapped by the Houthis in November. This is an interesting development since up until now, all these different groups, the Houthis, Hezbollah, different militias, have all said they are supporting Hamas in Gaza. This is the first time that Hamas is actually publicly saying, actually, we're in coordination with these other groups, and they are carrying out attacks based on our coordination as well. The fact that Hamas said that they are going to take part in negotiating the release of the crew from the Galaxy Leader also may be important, as Hamas is trying to position itself as a regional actor in addition to the ongoing war when it comes to these negotiations. Moving on to some of the political and general trends of the last 24 hours. In Israel, the Interior Minister Moshe Arbel and the head of the Shabak, Ronen Bar, held a meeting today with the leaders of Arab, Palestinian, and Israeli local councils, discussing the challenges of Ramadan. In Israel, there's great concern that Hamas is hoping to use Ramadan in order to incite uprisings of Palestinians both in the West Bank and in Israel, and reportedly this meeting was meant in order for the government to express its concerns to the heads of Arab, Palestinian, and Israeli local councils, and at the same time to hear from them what are the needs of the population in a way to try to mitigate this possible escalation that will occur in the coming weeks. Other news, leading up to the visit of Israel's President Herzog in Holland, a pro-Palestine group submitted a request to issue an arrest warrant against him, citing his part in the war crimes and genocide in Gaza. Remains to be seen how this actually develops. Other news, Israel responded to South Africa's request for new injunctions from the ICJ. I reported about this in the last several days. Israel stated that the requests are baseless and that South Africa continues to act as Hamas's legal arm and cynically utilize the court in order to promote these baseless allegations. In other political news, Japan announced today that it is leveling sanctions against Hamas leaders and different money handlers of the group. In addition to this, Norway published a recommendation to companies to stop doing business with settlements or any company that contributes to Israeli settlements development, adding that this is a direct contribution to violation of human rights and international law. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, in his State of the Union speech, President Biden reiterated his commitment to a two-state solution, stating, and I quote, "There is no other path that will guarantee Israeli security and democracy, and will guarantee that Palestinians can live in peace and with dignity. There is no other path that will guarantee peace between Israel and its neighbors, including Saudi Arabia," end the quote. So at this point, what we're seeing is that President Biden is still trying to push forward this idea of a regional deal that will include normalization between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and possibly other countries in exchange for developing a future Palestinian state, which in his vision will not only guarantee peace and dignity for the Palestinians, but also secure Israel's democracy and allow Israel to live in peace and security. Remains to be seen how the sides relate to this. According to the plan in the United States, this was supposed to start with that 6-week truce that would then allow the sides to build on something that would possibly mature into a complete ceasefire and then taking these diplomatic steps. Right now, that seems pretty far. However, again, the different negotiators are applying a lot of pressure on the sides, so maybe something will materialize in the coming weeks. If you enjoyed these summaries, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe. If you want to know when summaries come out, turn on notifications. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.